What is up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Not So Stupid podcast. Today's episode, I am very excited to have Bryan Boorstein on the show. He is somebody that I have learned a lot from over the years in the realm of training, and I'm excited for you guys to see his thoughts on a lot of different topics. It turns out that although our training styles aren't exactly the same, a lot of the principles that we had when it comes to coaching really overlap. And that was just really fun to see. But for those of you unaware of who Bryan is and why I'm so excited to have him on, he has been someone that has over 24 years of training experience, 13 plus years coaching people. He's a 3 times CrossFit regional athlete, CrossFit Games coach, CF2, CF mobility certifications, Bachelor's of Science, Bachelor's of Exercise Science from JMU. He's been featured on ESPN Radio plus numerous podcasts. He's the owner and founder of 2 training businesses, Evolve Training Systems and Paragon Training Methods. And he's just a really cool guy to sit down and talk with, to be honest with you. So really cool opportunity I had here talking with Bryan, and I'm excited for you guys to hear what he has to say, especially on what it takes to have a successful fat loss phase, as he is going to share with us his current fat loss phase that he's going through as well, and how he's been able to lose I believe about 15 pounds without doing any cardio. So really cool insights from Bryan. And without further ado, here's the interview with Bryan Boorstein.
All right, Bryan Boorstein, welcome to the Not So Stupid podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. Very, very happy to be here and connect with you.
Yeah, for sure, man. I'm excited to have you. So for the people unfamiliar with who you are, do you mind sharing a little bit about your story and how you ended up where you are now?
Yeah, totally. 15 years old, I began to find interest in trying to gain muscle and strength. There were a few reasons for this. I, of course, wanted to impress girls, but more importantly than that, I needed to get stronger for basketball. So I was a prototypical, like, short white kid. I was really, really late in puberty. So I was already like a point guard. And then as kids started having puberty bestowed upon them, and I was still, sitting there at 5'2" in 9th grade, I decided that it was time to do something to improve my physical stature. And that's where I found weightlifting. I was really lucky at that point in my life because there were probably 2 or 1 primary way that people found fitness at that time, or weightlifting, and it was usually through the muscle magazines. So we're talking about like the late 90s here. It was 1997. And it was like Muscle and Fitness, or it was Flex magazine or whatever. And the whole thing was around this like steroid performance enhancement culture of training. And the whole thing was, 20 or 30 sets of a body part every day, and, different body part every day. And then you do it again the next week, and you just continue this forever. And so essentially those workouts would get you so sore from like 20 or 30 sets that you would literally need until like the next week before you could actually walk again if it was a leg day or whatever. But luckily I did not fall into this camp. So I found a forum on the internet at the time. It was like the fledgling forums where people were actually talking about like fitness and bodybuilding, and there was kind of enlightened conversation around it. So I found a forum that was focused on the idea of 3 full body workouts a week. It was really similar to the philosophies that were used in what they call the pre-steroid era of training. So that's how I trained for the first 3 years or so. And it was the perfect accompaniment for my basketball because it was 3 days a week. It was full body. I never got so sore to the point that it affected my performance on the court or anything like that. But it also had, great aesthetic benefits, and it improved my physique and all that stuff. It became a passion. I kind of became obsessed with training, and I went to college for exercise science and sports management. But kind of along the way in college, I fell trapped to the good times, and I continued lifting, but I didn't pay attention to my nutrition at all. I would say I was drinking 4 nights a week. I was eating cafeteria fried chicken sandwiches and all that stuff. Throughout college, kind of that whole experience was really like that. Just continued training and putting in the work, and then having a lot of fun. After college, I didn't think that I would be able to make a real living at the time. So it was 2006, and all the jobs that I was looking into that were available for someone, with an exercise science major, sports management, et cetera, was like, you could be a strength and conditioning coach for like a Division III university or a high school, and then, work your way up. And maybe if you're lucky one day, you'll make $100,000 in 15 years or something like that.
Mhm.
And to me, that just didn't sound that cool. I was like, I don't want to make $30,000 right out of college when all my friends are making like 50. So I went into recruiting. I did aviation recruiting and did really well. It was a commission-based job. Met a girl, moved out to San Diego in 2007 with her, and stayed in the corporate world. Worked in the corporate world until about 2010, at which point my college roommate and I, Anders Varner from Barbell Shrugged. I don't know if your audience knows Barbell Shrugged, but he and I were college roommates, and we started a CrossFit gym together in 2010. Did the whole CrossFit thing for over half a decade, competed at regionals. About 2016, Anders and I kind of had differing ideas on where to take the gym. I started finding myself more enthralled with kind of strength and hypertrophy training and a little bit less in the realm of performance and CrossFit and all the kind of things that go into being a good CrossFitter, like, multiple training sessions a day and constantly having to warm up for 30 minutes because all your joints hurt and all these things. So I moved on from that. And then in 2017, I started one of my companies, Evolved Training Systems. 2018, I partnered with Lori Christine King and we started Paragon Training Methods. And then just been kind of building those businesses and getting more nuanced with my love of programming and scientific literature and learning as much as I can. And that kind of takes us to the current.
Yeah, man, I love it. It's such a crazy journey because you've kind of touched on every kind of training method, throughout your time. What do you think is what's gotten you falling in love with hypertrophy right now more than anything, as opposed to CrossFit like you were before?
It's a good question. I think the main reason, like initially right out of CrossFit, that I fell in love with it is because it was so sustainable. Like there was literally no detriment on my body. My joints started feeling good. All the knee issues I was having, the shoulder issues, the elbow issues, all of these things dissipated within a matter of months when I stopped CrossFitting and switched to more hypertrophy training. And then for me personally, and I know you and I have had discussions about this as well, but I'm not a huge fan of like intense cardio. It just doesn't like really work well with my body. We call it like the glycolytic work or whatever, where you're in that like 3 to 12 minute range of like really hard efforts. And those things, that type of cardiovascular work just tends to beat me down and drain me. And it doesn't really give me a lot in return. So I've really liked that kind of within the realm of optimizing hypertrophy, it's almost as if doing those glycolytic cardiovascular sessions are counterproductive to the goal. For a number of reasons, cortisol release and fatigue cost and energy expenditure, difficulty tracking energy expenditure, things like that. So I now kind of just walk, or I like go for bike rides around town at like a casual pace, and I lift weights. And that's really been what I've done now for about 5 years. And my body feels amazing. Like I can't believe I'm about to turn 39 and I literally feel better than before I started CrossFit when I was 26. So, so yeah, I think that's probably the primary reason. And then the secondary reason is that it just gives me something to pursue. And as somebody that enjoys the process of improvement, I kind of make it akin to someone who's playing golf. Like I'm not really trying to beat other people at all. I'm just trying to better my score each time I go out there and improve my execution, my technical proficiency and things like that. So I get better at performing movement, which then places more of that load into my muscles and less of that load on my joints. And it just kind of continues to make the process more sustainable.
Yeah. So now instead of like a performance aim, you have other lifting aims that you work toward that aren't beating you down. You feel a lot better about it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's more of a strategic approach, a strategic move, switching over, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's a long-term solution to be able to stay lifting weights for the rest of my life. Yeah.
Do you think it's a part of the issue from before? Is like, because I know CrossFit's kind of evolved from like the early 2010s to now. Do you think it's CrossFit itself or how CrossFit was done that was kind of beating you down?
So I think that it's both. I think that inherently CrossFit, the sport, like if you're playing the sport of CrossFit, you have to train 3 times a day because it's a skill development sport. Like, you cannot get better at doing these gymnastics movements. You can't get more efficient. You can't work on your breathing patterns. You can't learn how to save energy at every turn unless you're actually doing it and practicing, right? The principle of specificity. So I think at a high level, it does beat you down. I think the thing that the high level athletes have that saves them is that their nutrition is perfect. Their recovery is perfect. They're literally professional athletes. So they're probably getting ice baths and massages. They're sleeping 8 to 10 hours a night. They're eating all the protein. They're eating all the carbs. They probably move really well for the most part. So they're doing their part to lessen the burden on their joints. The problem is that this is being extrapolated down into like the general population that's doing CrossFit. And I think that if you're that CrossFit person that trains in a class 3 to 5 times a week for an hour, you're fine. It's really healthy for you. It's so good because you're going to lift some weights. You're going to do some cardio. You're going to work on some skills. You're going to meet some people and give some high fives. Like, it's all good stuff. The problem is when you go from that person that's like the 3 to 5 times a week for an hour to like, ooh, maybe I could like do some local competitions. And like, local competitions are like the lowest level of competition. Like, anybody can do them, but now you have like something to train for. So now you're like, okay, I got to practice my snatches in my off time. And then I got to work on my butterfly pull-ups, and I got to do this and do that. And suddenly you're a general population person, but you're training as if you're a professional athlete, but you don't move very well. So you're causing a lot of burden on your joints. You don't recover well. And all of these things kind of snowball, and eventually it just creates a massive issue at the general population level.
Yeah, and obviously on top of that, they're having full-time jobs and work-related stresses that the professional athletes don't have because this is their job. Their job is to recover. So that obviously breaks them down even further, right?
For sure. Yeah.
So now you mentioned a few times like how well, you mentioned once, I actually think, how hypertrophy has kind of helped with your stress management and cortisol regulation. You want to dive deeper on that and why you think it's more beneficial for you in your current life for that pursuit?
I think it's very individual, right? So like for me, like I never, even in the CrossFit days, the thing that I struggled with the most when it came to competing in CrossFit was the cardiovascular side of it. I actually was okay at like the long-term stuff. Like if there was a workout that was like an hour, I could just outpace everybody. And even if I started slower than them, I would usually make up ground over the course of the hour, and I would finish somewhere where I expected to. But it was like that, like 5 minute to 15 minutes of like just go, where you have to like just push your body to unbearable levels of pain and uncomfortability. And I was always really bad at that. So it's tough to say if that's like something that was predetermined within my like genetic profile, you know, because the same things occurred to me in basketball too. Like I always was an awful defender. Like my offense was on point. I could shoot and whatever. I could pass and dribble. My defense sucked because I would just get tired. So it's been like the story of my life. And so no matter how much training I did around it, like I actually spent an entire year or two in CrossFit where I focused specifically on doing those like 5 to 15 minute period workouts and trying to get better at them. And I just never got better. So I think that there's like an inherent dislike that I have for that time domain, as well as, you know, just a physical inability to do well with it. So I think the fact that that type of training is so unenjoyable for me, that even before I do it, there's a cortisol response. It's like just the thought of like, oh, fuck, I need to do this like 15-minute miserable like HIIT workout or whatever. Like that gives me anxiety on its own. And then, you know, then I do the workout and I feel awful at the end. And I just like lay on the ground writhing in pain for 30 minutes. And then that's just not very conducive to the things that are important in my life, which are like, so I can now, after a hypertrophy workout, I can literally finish my last set and I just walk up the stairs, sit on the couch, and I pull out my computer and start doing work. Like literally 15 minutes after a HIIT workout, I'm still on the ground, like questioning my life. Right. So though that's probably primary reasons for that.
Man, I recently, I started half marathon training just for the sake of, first of all, I hate running. I want to preface that. I really hate running, but I wanted to do this because I hated it and kind of see like, just put myself in an intentionally uncomfortable position and see where I go from there. And that point that you just made really resonated with me, because yesterday I had an 8-mile run and I needed 45 minutes to lay down after that
Yeah.
and just catch my breath and rethink about everything. And like it was hot outside, so I had to cool down too.
Yeah.
Really put a damper on my whole day. I'm like, there's no way I can do this for the foreseeable future after that.
Right. And then the other kind of downstream effect of that is that now you lower NEAT for the rest of the day because you feel like a bag of dicks or whatever, whatever the phrase is. Don't actually just cancel that out.
Right.
But you feel awful, right? So then you just lay on the couch all day. You don't want to move. You don't want to be active. You don't want to get up and do stuff. And you have a compensating mechanism. So even if you're doing those runs, like somebody might be doing those runs, not for the purpose of running a half marathon, because they think they want to lose fat or increase their energy expenditure. And like, if you're compensating downstream by moving less, then you're really kind of not accomplishing the goal.
Yeah, no, I love that a lot because I for my coaching practices, what I like to emphasize is trying to get you to eat as much as possible and do as little cardio as possible to lose weight, and really focus on the steps and walking, like you mentioned before. And I think that the science is very clear on the benefits of that in the short term and long term as a sustainability thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's how I feel too, man. Like people always ask me like, well, what about heart health? You know, like that's always the question, like, oh, well, don't I have to do cardio so that I have like my heart healthy and stuff? And like all the studies, like you said, are literally like, you know, weightlifting on its own and done at like a certain intensity and volume, et cetera. But weightlifting on its own under certain parameters is more than sufficient for heart health. And those studies have compared weightlifting to cardiovascular exercise. So then if you take weightlifting and walking, which wasn't even included in the study, then I think you have a banger and you have a bright future ahead of you.
Yeah. And I think like there's a lot of just walking studies that show the benefits of it.
Without weightlifting. Right.
Yeah, without weightlifting. It's just like, just do walking in general and you're golden. And you know, before we actually got on the interview, I told you that there were some Instagram questions. There's one that I can kind of fit in here. I think would do really well. And it was a 2-part question: cardio's role in fat loss, which you kind of covered, not as being a necessary thing. And if you want to expand on that, I would love that. And how you can use cardio in hypertrophy or for performance to help improve your lifts as well. If you can talk about that too.
Yeah, totally. Let's talk about that first. So work capacity, that would be kind of the purpose of cardio in like a hypertrophy phase. And that's actually the way that I will often program cardio for clients, is to throw it in like a surplus where you're feeding it. You have enough fuel to feed it, right? If you're in a deficit and you don't have calories to feed this extra energy expenditure, then now you're really going to have like cortisol release and things like this. But when you're in a surplus phase, you're actually in a perfect position to do cardiovascular activity. You're fueled for it. Your glycogen is completely full, right? So I love that. I actually, I think an even more effective way than using cardio to build work capacity in a surplus is probably to use your training as a tool to build your work capacity. So, you know, we have hypertrophy phases, which are going to be mostly straight sets, relatively long rest periods between sets, as like a general parameter. And then you would have something like a metabolite phase, which would be, the purpose would be to work on your cardiovascular conditioning so that you can perform better in the hypertrophy phases down the road. Maybe that means that then you would have to take less rest between sets, which would allow you to accrue more volume. You would recover faster between sessions, things like that. So in the design of a metabolite phase, you would do things like submaximal loading. So there's like kind of two ways that you might go about building a metabolite phase for hypertrophy. One way would be like for peripheral conditioning, and that would be like your local musculature. So it would be like, you know, I need to get my chest better at recovering between sets. So I'm going to pick essentially like a 15 to 20 rep weight that would take me to failure in the 15 to 20 rep range. But I'm just going to do like 6 to 8 sets of 8. With maybe like 30 seconds rest between sets. So the first, 2, 3, 4 sets that you're doing are going to be pretty easy. You're not going to have a huge issue with them because they're submaximal. But as the metabolites accumulate in the muscle, you're going to have to push a little bit closer to failure on each set. And then eventually somewhere between the like 6 and 8 set point, of 8 reps, you'll probably reach failure. And at that point, you kind of know that you've exhausted the purpose for that session. And you can even progress this stuff too. So, say you get 6 sets of 8, and then on the 7th set, you get 7 and you fail. Then now the next week you can be like, okay, I need to finish the 7th set and maybe I'll get some reps into the 8th set or something like that. So that would be like one way you could build peripheral, like local musculature conditioning. And then you could build systemic conditioning through kind of alternating supersets of big muscle groups. So you could take you could do like a tricep. Like one thing I love to do is go like back squat into bench press into bent over row. And then rest like, 2 or 3 minutes and do that again for 3 or 4 cycles or something like that. So yeah, though that will build like full body systemic conditioning. And so usually, conditioning is an adaptation that occurs much faster than hypertrophy or muscle building.
Right.
So within like a 2 to 4 week period of doing these kind of metabolite phases, you will probably notice a significant difference and will have exhausted most of the benefit you can get. And then you can kind of jump right back into a hypertrophy phase from there.
Okay. That was kind of going to answer my next question. How long do you usually program these metabolite phases for? It sounds like 2 to 3, 4 weeks.
Yeah. I think you would generally start with a systemic conditioning. So maybe like 1 to 2 weeks of systemic conditioning and then 1 to 2 weeks of like local peripheral conditioning. And then you can jump right back into a hypertrophy phase.
Okay. And then now kind of tying this back to something you mentioned earlier about what you enjoy doing in training. If someone does enjoy this kind of training, how do you even incorporate it, even though it's not necessarily conducive to their goals, but they just love doing it?
The metabolite style training, you mean?
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, there's ways you can fit it in. I guess like everything comes with an opportunity cost. So like, if doing the very perfect way in my mind is going to get you the most results possible, like if you're changing a couple things here and there and you're doing more metabolite phases than maybe would be optimal, I honestly can't imagine that impacts your results a whole ton because, adherence is always going to be the bottom of the pyramid. And the people that are getting the best results are doing training that they adhere to because they enjoy it. So like I'm actually the opposite of that, if you're not surprised by that, where I just want to do hypertrophy training and I don't want to do metabolite phases. So I'm actually probably suboptimal in that I only do these metabolite phases maybe once a year, and I probably should do them 3 times a year or something like that. So, so it is what it is, man. You got to train the way you enjoy. And as long as you're within the parameters of optimality, I think you're going to be just fine.
I really like that you mentioned opportunity costs, because I think a lot of people get caught up with what is the best thing for me to do? How can I get all my, like everything that I want all at once? But it's really not that simple. You just got to do the things you want, accept the consequences of those things or what you're not getting out of it.
I mean, that's like the way we live life too. I mean, it's relevant in every aspect of life. So we're always making decisions that are going to, compromise one thing and advantagize what is it? Provide an advantage for a different area.
Advantage made sense though.
Thanks, dude. Appreciate that.
But yeah, no, I think it's basically there's no right or wrong decision. There's just like you're gonna win something, you're gonna lose something, and as long as you accept that, then it's a right decision for you at that point in time, basically. Yeah,
absolutely. Do you want me to address what was the first part of the question? It was about cardio and fat loss.
Cardio and fat loss, yeah. How you would use it. They also said when and how much. Under that. So if you want to get more specific, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is actually perfect because I just made that post that I think you and I discussed on DM before my account was hacked. Right. But basically I made a big post. It's actually the first post on my new account. But it's basically an equation for fat loss, and it breaks down the way that I prefer to utilize cardio or not utilize cardio within the spectrum of a fat loss phase. And generally I just don't unless you want to count walking as cardio, I just don't cardio because I would say there's like 3 or 4 primary reasons. One is that it really clouds diagnostics. And what I mean by that is in the equation that I provided for fat loss, you have 3 variables. You have steps per day, you have nutrition or calories, and then you have lifting weights. Lifting weights is going to be stable. We're not going to change that. We're just going to work out 4 to 5 times a week for 60 to 90 minutes, and we're going to follow a similar routine week to week. So we're not going to change lifting too much. That's a stable variable. So we basically just have to manipulate steps and nutrition. And it's a really easy equation once you get it down to simple terms like that, right? So you may start a diet at, what I usually do is prescribe about 8,000 steps to somebody, and about 300 to 500 calories below their projected maintenance, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. So somebody whose maintenance was 3,000 calories might start at 2,500 calories and 8,000 steps. And then we just kind of look at the weekly averages of weight. And if you go 2 weeks and the scale doesn't move, 10 to 14 days, not quite 2 weeks, I would say 10 to 14 days. If the scale's not moving, then you either add 2,000 steps or decrease 100 calories. And by kind of modulating it like that, you can really create like a process that just works. I mean, there's no guesswork involved. So then you go ahead and you introduce something like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to go run 20 minutes. I'm going to do intervals one day, or I'm going to do this like circuit CrossFit workout, or I'm going to do an Orange Theory class, or whatever it is. And you literally have no idea how many calories you burn during those sessions. Like, mm-hmm. it matters too, because when you're trying to dial in fat loss, like, you need to know these numbers so that you can then make the adjustments and ensure that you're going to succeed. I get that you could succeed without doing this. People have succeeded doing cardio for years, but right. I think that this simplifies the process so much that it makes it very accessible for somebody at the general population level to diet themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on that?
Yep.
So I really like that you use the word simplify, because one of the cornerstones for my coaching is just get your nutrition dialed in, get your steps dialed in, and get like all the variables in one place, and we could see the data and how it changes over time.
Yep.
Tracking cardio really overcomplicates that, because like you said, if you really want to track cardio as specific as you can to get as accurate of a calorie burn as you can, yep. you need to like know so much about each individual session, the rate. Like, let's say if you're running, how fast you were running, your pace, how long mm-hmm. you did it for, the conditions of the run as well play a big role, that kind of thing. So it's so much extra data that you can just avoid altogether, and still get the same results.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. And then kind of going down the line of other negative ramifications of doing cardio in the pursuit of retaining muscle mass in a deficit, right? Like, right. I guess there's some people that maybe could care less about this, but one thing that I find important is like, hey, I've worked so hard for every pound of muscle that I've gotten in the last couple of years. I don't want to mm-hmm. lose this in the dieting process. So legs, man, like when I would diet in the past and I would do cardio, my legs would shrink. And they've always been like a bad body part for me compared to upper body, which has always come in much easier. Mm-hmm. So I need all the leg muscle I can get. And literally running or biking has shrunk my legs more than anything else. But the last 2 diets that I've done with just doing steps, mm-hmm. my legs not only remain with the size that they had that I built in the off season, but they remain the strength. And that's a huge, huge piece, because strength is an important correlate to muscle size. So if you're maintaining strength on like your squats and your RDLs or deadlifts or whatever you're doing, then you can be pretty assured that you're not losing muscle mass in those areas too. So yeah, there's a definite fatigue cost that's associated with doing cardio. And if that fatigue cost impacts the quality of your weight training sessions, then you're choosing cardio over muscle mass essentially.
Can you really quick share the stats of your current diet and like what you've accomplished without cardio, just to kind of give people like an actual idea of this is actually happening right now?
Yeah, totally. So it's been just over 12 weeks of dieting. I took a 2-week diet break in June. So I've actually only been dieting for 10 weeks, but it's been 12 total like calendar weeks. And I've gone from 200 pounds starting body weight to 187 currently. So that's 13 pounds in 12 weeks with a 2-week diet break. Mm-hmm. And it's been very linear. I've pretty much lost on average about a pound a week. I mean, it's weird. I've been posting my weights every day on Instagram, but mm-hmm. It's like I got down to 194 like really fast, because my body was just kind of, flushing glycogen and fluids and stuff like that. But I got down to 194 in like a week and a half. And then I just stuck there for like 4 weeks. And then I got down to 191. And then I like stuck there for a few weeks. But like overall, week by week, it's kind of just averaged about a pound a week, which is literally what we want, right? Like 500 calorie deficit, you're losing about half a percent of your body weight each week. It was just perfect. And I haven't lost any strength. I've actually gained strength on a couple movements and maintained on others. I have no real issues with energy right now, or sleep, or any of those kind of other detrimental issues that people tend to recognize when they diet. And overall, like, I thought my cut last year in 2020 was my best one ever, and this one has been thus far even better than that one. So I guess every time you do it, you learn something and you can apply it and get a little bit more precise, you know?
Yeah, no, that's so awesome. And then what do you probably share this on your Instagram story, but I never actually knew, or I might have missed it, what your actual goal point is for this, like where you trying to end up at.
Totally. So for context, the last cut that I did in 2020 was cut down to 185 pounds. And I was mostly just doing that for a photo shoot. And then over the last 9 months, I worked my way slowly back up from where I was at 185 up to the 200. And then my goal this time is to get lean enough that I can have a realistic idea of how much further I would have to go if I were to go compete in natural bodybuilding. And I don't know the answer to that still. So even at 187 pounds where I am right now, I don't think I'm close enough to being lean enough to actually like step on stage. I think parts of my body are getting there, like my abs and my back, upper back. Some areas of my quads are starting to come in, but like there's a lot of areas that are not, like my low back and my kind of subscap area and glutes and hamstrings are not there. So I still have a little ways to go before I can get an idea of that realistically. But my guess is that I'll probably have to get as low as the low 180s to get an idea. And then I think that my idea will probably tell me that I'll need to get to the low 170s to actually step on stage. And I think that if I get there to the low 180s and it seems like I'm going to have to go lower than the low 170s, I'm probably just going to say, fuck it on this bodybuilding thing. I don't think there's any part of me that wants to go below 172 or 173 or something like that.
Right. It's probably just discouraging being under 190 as it is. I'm
yeah,
sure.
Man. Yeah, totally. My podcast co-host, Aaron, he's always like, man, if I ever saw like a 180 anything on the scale, I think I would just like shrink up and die, you know?
Right. I know that feeling all too well, because I think we're in the same kind of weight range. I'm 6 foot and I'm 197 right now.
Okay.
And I'm about to do a diet phase heading into mid-October. And I'm aiming for like 182, 185. But just thinking that that's where I'm aiming toward is kind of discouraging to me as it is. I'm going to lose all my gains. I don't know what this
right.
is going to be gone, but I'll get over it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that like they're definitely, when you diet right, there's a weird period. And I would call it even like, so when you first start dieting, you actually look good because you like dump all that like cell volume and water and stuff. So like the first, week or two, you're like, oh yeah, I look great. Right. But then like once you dump maybe 10 pounds, 12 pounds, something like that, you just kind of look at yourself and you're like, I look like a smaller version of myself, but I don't like actually feel like I'm more cut yet.
Right.
And then like something happens and like, you lose another 5, 6, 7 pounds. And somewhere in those like last few pounds, you're like, what the fuck just happened? I'm like a new person, So we all have to get through that like really messed up head game of that middle area where you just look like a smaller, flatter version of yourself.
Yeah, no, that's like that awkward phase where you're like, damn, should I keep going? Should I not keep going?
right. Like, I think I'm looking worse right now. What's happening?
Yeah. I thought this was working, but now I don't know anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's all like a mental game at that point. After the initial win and the final win, you got to just push through it. All right, so now I want to get into a couple more of those questions while we still have the time that I told you about on Instagram. Some of my followers shared. This one kind of flows into what we talked about a little while ago. This person gave their specific situation, just finished a build phase and want to start a cut in 2 weeks. How should my training change? And I asked for clarification on this, want to see if it was like a cardio versus training thing, but he's specifically training. He's not trying to incorporate cardio, and he's thinking, should my training be mostly high rep, low weight kind of activity, So if you want to touch on that, because I know we talked about that on the Instagram DMs a little bit.
Yeah, no, I don't think you should just go with high rep, low weight stuff. I think at that point you're essentially using training as a tool to burn calories because doing more reps is going to burn more calories. But that's going to be an inefficient way for you to actually retain muscle mass throughout the cut. With that said, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with sets of 15 to 20 reps, aside from the fact that when you are cutting, you don't have a lot of the fuel that's needed to support those higher rep ranges. So you're essentially like going through the motions, just fatiguing yourself just to get to the point that those weights actually feel hard, which can make sense in a bulking phase because you have all the glycogen and all those like carbs flowing through your body. In a cutting phase, like we want to be as meticulous as we can with pretty much every bit of effort and volume that we use in our weight training. Very specific in that we want to get the most stimulus out of each rep and set that we're doing with the least fatigue cost. Because if we're causing a lot of fatigue, we're going to cause a lot of the same issues that I talked about that cardio causes with the cortisol rise and difficulty recovering and things like that. So I think there are a few things that you can do to actually kind of enhance or optimize your training in a deficit. So one is to primarily focus on straight sets, but for the same reason as I just said, right? You don't have the fuel utilization or the fuel availability to be able to do like supersets and drop sets and all these like extended kind of intensity techniques. Mm-hmm. Those things are you're just gonna end up losing muscle if you try to incorporate a lot of that stuff. So I'm a big fan of straight sets. I'm a big fan of choosing movements that you get the most out of. So in a not that that's not something you should always be doing, but I think that when you're in a surplus phase, you have a little bit more freedom of exercise selection because you can do more volume in general, right? So you can do the exercise that feels the best for you, and then you can go experiment with something else. But in a cutting phase, you can't do as much volume because you just don't have as much recovery. So you just have to be more specific with your exercise selection and choose the movements that are best for you. That doesn't mean that like you choose a pec deck fly instead of a bench press because you're like, oh, but the pec deck fly, I really feel it. Like there's differences in movement quality. So like a fly is not a compound movement like a dumbbell press would be or something like that. So I think there's context there. But another thing you can do is bias the movements that you choose to have a little bit less damage in them, or do fewer sets of the damaging movements. So think about like if you're training your hamstrings, you have an RDL. Mm-hmm. An RDL is an extremely damaging movement. It overloads your hamstrings and your glutes at the stretched position, which is the bottom of the movement. If you replace your RDL or you do fewer RDLs, maybe you still do like 1 set or 2 sets, but you don't do like 4 sets or something like that. But if you replace a few of those sets with something like a weighted hip extension, the back extension machine, then now we're doing a movement that overloads the shortened position, which is the top of the rep. Movements that overload the shortened position are going to be less damaging than movements that overload the lengthened position, which means that you can generally do more sets, meaning you're accruing more volume, you're getting more stimulus for your muscle with less fatigue cost. To take that a step further, you could even implement more leg curls, because leg curls are going to be even less fatiguing than hip extension would, and also train the hamstrings. So there's a couple different ways that you can kind of do that. And I would just say, monitor performance, because if you are seeing your performance decrease, that's a pretty good sign that you're losing muscle. Mm-hmm. And if you're maintaining performance while maintaining technique, then that's a pretty good sign that you're maintaining muscle.
I like that you made the point to start off with that training shouldn't be used to burn calories. We have steps for that. We have controlling your nutrition for that. This is more to absolutely maximize the mechanical tension and muscular tension that you're going to have while lifting, right? And maintain that muscle tissue.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I think a lot of people get too caught up in the calorie burn game, because every device that you own has something that is telling you how many calories you're burning. And then when you look at the numbers, it's like, this doesn't burn as many calories as this, but this does help you look better in the end because you maintain the muscle.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the maintaining the muscle too, like then that actually like allows you to burn more calories at rest. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's got like so many benefits downstream, like glucose sensitivity and like all of these different things.
Yeah, no, I love that. And now So going off to the next question, this one is for hypertrophy and strength development. What's the most optimal intensification technique when it comes to adding weight to your major lifts? And they're talking about the, squat, deadlift, bench, overhead press.
What do you think they mean by intensification techniques?
I asked, okay, I did actually ask, I should have said that. They were saying, should I do drop sets? Should I do cluster sets? Should I do contrast sets? That kind of thing. So.
Okay, so I actually don't think you should do any of those on big compound movements. I think that those techniques are much, much, much better for the smaller isolation style movements, because the big compound movements are subject to form breakdown under fatigue. So I'm actually not even a fan of taking like free weight squats or deadlifts or anything like that. I'm not a fan of taking any of those even to failure, much less beyond failure. I think that when we do that, we start seeing things like, an RDL turns into a question mark, and you see squats turn into movements where instead of staying vertical up and down, we're essentially folding over at the hip and the glutes are rising first. So those are all things that we want to avoid for hypertrophy at all costs, because now you're shifting tension out of your primary target. You're shifting it into what are essentially stronger muscle groups, right? Your quads cannot squat vertically. So now you're going to shift at the hips. You're going to shift all that tension into your glutes because they're stronger. But now you're just continuing to exacerbate the problem, which is your quads are weak. So doing intensity techniques on big compound movements is really just not a great idea in general. There are lots of ways that you can increase strength on compound movements if that's the goal. One simple thing I really like to do is have one strength-based session at the beginning of the week, and then a few days later, when you're no longer fatigued, do like a speed session. So something like, 2 or 3 sets of 4 to 6 would be your strength work on Monday. And then on Thursday or Friday, you might come back in and do 6 sets of 2 at 90% of Monday's weight or something like that, right? That's just a general example. But one low fatiguing session where you work on explosiveness and movement proficiency, and one other day where you actually kind of grind and try to progressive overload and things like that.
Adding on to that question, for like me asking this question now,
yeah.
Do you think there's value for compound lifts, bench press specifically, in forced negatives, where you just overload the bar, you only do the negative and push back up?
No. I think the fatigue cost is just going to be too high, and you're just not going to be stimulating the muscle through the full ranges of motion like on your own. I mean, they're just like, science just hasn't shown that if anything, science has shown that you don't even have to train to failure to maximize results. Like, it's shown that 1 or 2 reps shy of failure essentially peaks your response, and that anything exponential, like anything beyond 1 or 2 reps from failure, has an exponential increase in fatigue for a linear increase in stimulus. So sure, you could go do a negative, but you just have to be really aware that now you're causing 3 units of fatigue for potentially 1 unit of stimulus.
Okay, that makes sense. So focus more on balancing that ratio out to be more stimulative, less fatiguing as a whole.
Yeah, and then just think, like, if you don't go do those forced negatives, you might be able to do 1 or 2 extra like good quality sets. Yeah, which then gives you more volume. It gives you more practice. You actually get the concentric rep, which is important. So anyways, those would be my thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, and then the last one for you from this list is how to progressively overload when I can't progressively overload anymore. And their definition of progressive overload is obviously just adding more weight. So
yeah, this is such a good question, because it actually goes to the root of the problem of people's interpretation of progressive overload. So there's this notion, for whatever reason out there in the world, that progressive overload means you have to add weight to the bar each session. That's actually the opposite of the way that it actually works, because progressive overload is an adaptation that has already occurred. So essentially what happens is, say 3 weeks ago, you bench pressed 225 pounds for 10. And it was really, really hard. Like, you essentially went to failure. Well, eventually, if you just keep doing 225 by 10 and you don't say, okay, now I'm going to go 230, then I'm going to go 235, then I'm going to go 240. If you just keep doing 225, eventually you're going to reach a point where 225 is too easy. Well, now that adaptation has occurred. It slapped you in the face and it's been like, dude, why are you still using 225? That shit is way too easy. Stop that. Add some weight to the bar. That is progressive overload. It's an adaptation that takes a couple weeks to actually occur. So people that think like every week I'm just going to add 2.5 pounds or 5 pounds and I'm just going to progressively overload myself to forever, it's just not reality. So we have to actually wait for the adaptation to catch up with us before we add weight. And we don't know how long that's going to take for that adaptation to occur. Sometimes it takes until you take a week off because you're just over fatigued. A perfect example of this is I was stuck on my hack press machine in my gym. I was stuck on 580 pounds I was getting 7 or 8 reps for like 2 straight months. Every week I did it, I would get 7 or I'd get 8 or I'd get 7 or I'd get 8. And I was like, I'm never getting stronger, you know? So eventually I just took a week off of the gym. A couple weeks ago, I had a week off, didn't train at all. You know, I went out and I rode my bike. I took walks and ate food and did all the things, recovered. First session back, I got 10 reps on that machine and I could have done like 2 more. So I broke my old sticking point by 2 reps, and then I still could have done 2 more if I wanted to. I just stopped at 2 reps from failure. And that is because I was so fatigued that my body couldn't actually create the adaptation that it needed for me to actually add weight or add reps or whatever it was. As soon as I recovered fully, my body allowed that adaptation to manifest and I got stronger. But what was I going to say? Crap. Anyway, yeah, if you have a question on that, it'll come back around.
Yeah, no, I was just kind of going to add to that. That flows with something I always say on the podcast, which is you train to earn the right to recover, because the recovery is where the real magic happens. That's where you're actually going to get the strength benefits. You're going to get the muscle development. You're going to get the fat loss, like actually become noticeably different in that time period. And I forgot what I was going to say now. So
the thing I was going to say real quick was just that if you're stuck and you have to reframe your mindset around progressive overload. Like the question asker, you need to just change the way you think about progressive overload. But then beyond that, if you're really stuck at like a certain weight and a certain reps for a certain amount of time, ask yourself when the last time you had a deload week was. I'm not even saying you have to take like a week off, but I usually recommend that if you're training hard, that you take a deload week, which is a week of 50% volume, 70% effort type thing. That you do one of those every 4 to 6 weeks. Usually I find myself doing one every 4 to 6 weeks. And that's what I prescribe for my clients. And those deload weeks are really critical in allowing those adaptations to occur so that you can see progressive overload happen. And if you're not seeing it happen, my guess is that your fatigue is too high and you need to flush some of that fatigue so that your body can show those adaptations for you.
Yeah, no, that was actually a great point to add. And it reminded me what I was going to say.
Cool.
In terms of shifting the perspective of progressive overload, I think this is very similar to how people view calorie deficits, because I think a lot of people come up to me, at least as a nutrition coach. I know you're not as much of a nutrition person, so I don't know how much they come up to you, but they're like, I've been in a calorie deficit this whole time. I've been eating in a calorie deficit this whole time, but I haven't actually lost weight. And to me, when I explain this to people, calorie deficit isn't something it's not a type of diet that you're doing. It's something that happens, as a result of a lot of things. It's something that's happening, just like progressive overload is happening. It's not something that you're actively doing.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that analogy for sure. And then I think that, so where I thought you were going to go with that was that you need to take like, refeeds and maintenance periods and stuff like that along the way, which I was going to be like, yeah, that is like a deload for a deficit.
It is, same idea. Wow. And it usually overlaps when you program it, but you just never really put it together now, conceptually, I guess.
Right.
Like for me, at least. And I don't want to speak for you.
No, for sure. Well, I've actually, there's the whole view of people, like there's the 2 camps of, you should do your refeed week during your deload week, because then, you're really going to amplify recovery. Right. And then there's the other side, which is you should actually do your refeed on the week before deload, because your fatigue is so high, you're smashing weights, you're going closer to failure, and you're about to have this like great recovery week. So you should really like feed the performance in that period. And to be honest, I kind of find myself falling in the latter camp where I want to feed the performance and then eat less during the deload week. But I know that it's pretty evenly split. I asked this question on my story the other day, and it was like 55-45 or something like that.
Oh, wow, really close.
Yeah.
Do you what was I going to say? For when you're programming this for clients, when choosing between refeed or deload, do you tend to change it per person, or do you kind of stick with the approach that you just said?
Usually it'll be twofold. It'll be a conversation with them, see what they want to do. And then if they don't exactly have an opinion or they haven't really experimented with it before, what I'll usually do the first time is I'll refeed the last half of the final week and then the first half of deload week, so that you still get like a 6 or 7 day refeed. But it happens over the course of like the end of a training week into a rest week, where either side of it is then open and still in a deficit.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. And then if it's like, if they themselves prefer the former argument, you let them choose that basically
going forward. I mean, if whatever they prefer is fine. Like some people really do feel like if they do a deload week and they're not eating at maintenance, they don't feel like they actually recover. For me, I do. Like, I feel like not training is the thing that helps me recover. It's not as much the nutrition. And I would much rather have those extra calories on the week where I'm really trying to like push the limits in the gym, with the knowledge that I have this recovery week coming up where I'm not going to have to train at all, or I'm going to train, minimally. And that just, it makes more sense for me, because I find my performance enhances. Right. And when I think about what that means for like the retention of muscle in a diet and things like that, I just really want to see that my performance doesn't decrease first and foremost. And if I can have a deload week where I'm still dieting and I don't see a decrement in performance, then to me that says that that's a good way for me to do it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing that. Okay, so we're coming close to the end of our time. So I got one more question for you, but before that, can you tell people where to find you and see more of your stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So I just had an Instagram account get hacked in late July. So my original account was at Bryan Boorstein, but now it's listed under the hacker's name, which is at hard16kk. So go report that account. What?
I saw that the day, I'm probably the day it happened. I saw that because I was looking at your story and the name changed. I'm like, I wonder what he's doing with this name change. Is it a rebrand or something?
That's really funny that you were like in the story when it happened.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. So it's not a rebrand. It's unfortunate. Yeah. I'm trying to get my account back, but my new account is at Bryan Boorstein 82. So you can check that one out. My businesses are Evolved Training Systems, so you can check that out at the www. And then the other one is Paragon Training Methods, also www. And Paragon Training Methods is a little bit more geared toward females, so most of our training is a little bit more glute heavy and a little less chest heavy. And then Evolved is honestly probably where most of my idea creation occurs. So I have these, methodology ideas of training and different techniques to try and stuff. And first I'll try them on myself. And then if I like them, then I'll put them in programs for Evolved. And then if those go well and people like them, then maybe, months later, it'll end up at Paragon at some point. So it kind of goes through this filtering system, and Evolved is just a really great place for people to come and be able to kind of try the stuff that's the newest on my brain. And then obviously probably a little better if you're a male as well.
It's kind of like a casual research facility.
That's exactly how I like to think about it. Yeah. Like it's like my lab experiments without actually taking like muscle biopsies and ultrasounds and stuff.
Yeah. No, that's so cool. But yeah, those will be linked in the show notes for anyone that's interested in following up with that. And then last question for you. This is the Not So Stupid podcast. We focus on simplicity as a way to improve your life. What is one simple thing that you recommend the listener right now to do that they could do right after they're done listening that'll dramatically improve their life?
I think that after every time that you have a meal that is larger than a small meal, so anything like moderate or higher, try to get 5 to 10 minutes of walking in immediately after. And I think that this will improve nutrient partitioning. It'll improve digestion, and it gives you some time to kind of build a very small endorphin high that kind of keeps you going for the next couple hours.
Yeah, no, I love that. I've had a number of people say walking before, but I like that you took a scientific approach to it. A lot of people took like a mindfulness approach, which obviously has benefits too, but
for sure.
Appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, of course. And thank you again, Bryan, for your time here and being on the show. Again, for anyone that's interested, his resources linked in the show notes. Definitely check him out. I've learned a lot from him over the years. You're going to learn a lot from him as well. And yeah, thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.